Time doesn't erase murder, it just hides it better. They said the case was closed. They said no one was watching, but someone always is. Enter the shadows, where every whisper is a clue, and the line between justice and obsession disappears. This is Santana True Crime.
Welcome to Santana True Crime. Tonight, I've got author and journalist B.R. Bates. B.R. Bates has authored a few books about Michigan serial killers, and she is the authority in that subject. Her first book, The Baby Doll Serial Killer, is about the serial killer John Eric Armstrong. Incredible book. And fun fact about this is BR has actually sat down and interviewed him in prison. And the other one that you need to pick up is The Crack City Strangler. This is the homicides of serial killer Benjamin Adkins. Again, incredible story. BR, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me back. It's great.
You were actually my first guest, which is another
Yeah.
fun fact, and I really appreciate that. And we were talking about that and about that experience, and you brought up serial killer Leslie Allen Williams.
hmm
What brought your attention to studying Mr. Williams?
The interesting thing about Williams, I think, his name came up briefly in the Benjamin Atkins case because he actually was killing people in Metro Detroit at the same time that Benjamin Atkins was in 1991 and 1992. And he was not in the inner city like Atkins, he was out in the suburbs northwest of Detroit in the around Oakland County and Livingston County. So I remember his name coming up. I remember him being mentioned as another serial killer that was active at the time. And I recently studied his case. I'm not an expert on it, but I have a working knowledge of his case. And I do find it very interesting. There's a lot of interesting little details about Mr. Williams, who also is still around and still serving out his multiple life sentences here in Michigan in Carson City in a correctional facility.
Yeah, I'll put up his most recent picture.
Mhm.
He's a white male with a scraggly beard.
Mhm.
I really think when I see this type of guy, like that's kind of the typical person that you want to keep your daughters away from.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think that it's really interesting too of what you're saying, how you've got two serial killers that are working relatively in the same area at the same time. And I
Mhm.
realize that Detroit is a high crime area, but is there any more examples that you can think of where this has happened?
Other cities where that's happened, I don't recall any offhand. And the crazy thing was in Detroit at the time. There was after the Benjamin Atkins case. Let me see. He was arrested in '92. He was tried for. There was a splashy story in Vanity Fair magazine about the case and about the FBI agents' work on the case and about one of the lead Detroit cops' works on the case in 1993. That beautiful, splashy story came out, and it mentioned that there were even other serial killers active at the time or in recent years. There was the FBI agent Paul Lindsay that worked on the Benjamin Atkins case, had also just worked on a case in a city called Inkster in Detroit of another serial killer. And I believe that serial killer was killing prostitutes like Atkins was. So there was this other killer. I don't know if he was ever caught. I don't know any details about that. There was Williams, there was Atkins at about time, and I think there may have been others too. So That's really crazy. I guess I keep referring to like the 80s and maybe even the 90s as the heyday of serial killers, as when we heard about serial killers, a lot more serial killers than we do now. So, yeah, wow, to have so many at the same relative time or in the same span of years is a little crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you look at that, that's kind of the last era of when we didn't have the technology from an investigative standpoint. We weren't getting up on cell phones. DNA was around, but not really understood like it is today. Uh,
Mhm.
I mean, I think OJ was the first time that DNA really came to the forefront in a investigation, and I remember just the controversy of, even though the expert said this is 99.9% accurate, people were still doubting that. And
Mm.
I it 1990s does not seem that long ago, but, definitely the technology and investigative practices are like night and day.
Yeah, I always say that it's getting harder and harder for a potential serial killer to take a second life. I always point to the video, the fact that like everything is on video, not just the phones, but also just all the businesses and people's homes and everything. And you watch one of my favorite true crime shows is See No Evil. If you've ever seen that, I don't know if it's on ID or Oxygen. Maybe it switches back and forth, but See No Evil I find so interesting because they show video footage of crimes that have been committed, and there you see lots of people on that show over the episodes who have killed a person, but they don't get a chance to kill anybody else because of that video surveillance. So yeah, it's getting harder these days. That's why I consider the 80s and 90s the heyday of serial killers.
Yeah, and I think one of the interesting points about where we're at now, it's backtracking.
Mm.
I had Dr. Bill Kimberlin, who wrote the book Watch Me Die, and you can see that show on YouTube or on Apple. But he interviews a lot of death row inmates and who are about to be executed, and he actually gets invited to their execution.
Oh, wow.
And kind of through that process, yes, he's done, 25 plus of these. And that's what his book is about. But throughout that process, he interviewed a lot of them and actually sat with them for their last meal. And they would even send him artwork. And now he's got his next project, which he told me off air, is that he's got two serial killers, one in South Carolina and one in Florida, that have confided in him the additional victims that they took during their killing spree,
Mm,
and
mm.
have gone so
Wow.
far as to draw oil paintings of where the bodies are in great detail. And so
Ooh,
he's
that
actually
reminds me.
working with the FBI and local agencies to be able to find these victims.
Okay, that
And it
reminds
was
me a
a lot
lot
of
of
typical serial killer behavior where they're going after prostitutes who are on the 100 plus flyers that you get when you're a police officer working in a
mhm.
decent size agency about missing persons. And so I think that this is kind of an interesting time that we're in.
Mhm. Yep. Yep. Wow.
So let's get back to Leslie Williams. Do you know about his earlier criminal career?
Mhm.
I see that he got arrested multiple times and he had some convictions for sexual assault and breaking and entering and some other violent crimes. Do you have any
Mhm.
details about those crimes?
Yeah, he definitely graduated to, bigger crimes as he went along. His first arrest was when he was only 17 years old in 1970. That was for breaking and entering, I guess, a neighbor's house. But that began a 22-year criminal career, and he was in and out of incarcerated many times. There were all kinds of different charges, and they were called different things over the years, but essentially he was breaking into places, he was stealing stuff, he was attacking people, he was trying to kidnap people. He graduated to rape and murder eventually in 91 and 92. So, a long criminal career, and behind bars, then released, behind bars, then released. Definitely a habitual offender.
So he's getting essentially slaps on the wrist when he's around this age if he's going in and out,
Yeah.
right? Because at
Yep.
some point in, I believe it is, was it 93 or 83 that he got sentenced to
1983 was
okay.
the bigger conviction.
And
Yeah.
that's when he
At
does
point
7 to 30 years, right?
Yeah, at that point, 1983, he had assaulted a woman. He had a couple big charges, big assault charges on him, and one of the charges, like the main assault charge, had a sentence of 5 to 10 years for him, but because he was a repeat offender at that point, he had a habitual offender charge that could have gotten him 7 to 30 years. So he could have been behind bars as long as 30 years at that point, but 1983, he was released in 1990. So that was a big problem, and when he was released in 1990, the crimes got worse and pretty rapid fire. Then things got really ugly.
So was he going to court in the same county as Detroit? Or, I mean, are these
No.
courtrooms just like overloaded with people, or why the leniency? Is it
Yeah, you
political?
would wonder because his all of his activity was in the suburbs. He did nothing in the city of Detroit. He was in the northwest suburbs. He attacked in New Hudson, he attacked in Milford, he attacked in South Lyon. He murdered in a little town, actually it's not far from me here, Heartland, in Tyrone Township, and then buried the bodies in Fenton. So he was all in the northwest suburbs and all different communities, and attacked a woman in Troy, which is east of here. And so he touched all these different municipalities, and you would think with these suburban towns they would be really interested in finding out when a girl came up missing or a woman was raped or a little girl was raped, as was the case in 1991, August 1991. He kidnapped a 9-year-old girl and raped her. I mean, you would think that all of these little cities would put a lot into these investigations. But I guess in the case of missing girls, like the 4 girls that he murdered, they were never found until after his arrest. So they were really just missing. And I guess the parents could hold out hope that maybe they just ran away, maybe they're alive somewhere. But unfortunately, that was not the case.
That's really so with these smaller departments, is this just lack of resources why they're not investigating this? Do you have any
Possibly.
background for that?
1991 and 92, I'm really not sure. That it could be about that from a police perspective, but I'm not sure.
And so he's sentenced to the 7 to 30 years. He does the bare minimum, gets out. When do we learn? You said we didn't learn about any of these murders until after he's actually arrested,
Mhm.
correct?
Yep.
Was he arrested for the murder itself, or was he
Nope.
arrested for another charge?
See, that's the interesting thing. He had killed 4 teenage girls, and that was between September 1991 and January 1992. And he had targeted is he worked at a gas station in the area, and the first victim, her name was Cami Villanueva, and she was 18 years old. She lived in South Lyon, and she would go into the gas station where he worked, and he would see her. And so he started stalking her, and he found out where she lived, and he studied her, and he went to her place a few different times. And so then that he abducted and killed her, he went to her house. She was home alone. He realized that, and he realized the front door was open. And so he went in, abducted her, took her away, killed her, etc. And so the point that I make is that all four of these girls, he then killed two more girls at the end of September, and then he killed a fourth girl at the beginning of January 92. But he put a lot of thought into these crimes. He studied these girls, he followed them, he stalked them, he found out where they lived and who they lived with, and etc. He put a lot of planning into it. Now, what got him arrested, and he even said as much when he started talking after his arrest, was his lack of planning. He had put all the planning into the four murders, but then he visiting a cemetery in Troy in Oakland County one day in May 1992. So some time had passed between his last murder in January and this encounter in May. And he evidently would visit cemeteries, which is another odd aspect of this case. He was said to be a little bit enthralled with cemeteries. He would walk around and even talk to the graves, one report said. So he was up at a cemetery in Troy and he saw a woman there, and she was not a girl. She was not a teenage girl like he typically targeted. She was in her mid 30s and she was there putting flowers on her mom's grave. And he considered him evidently a bit of a ladies' man, he considered himself. And so he said something to her, and it was a little bit flirtatious. And she was not having it. She was not interested. I mean, she was there putting flowers on her mom's grave. And so she gave him some curt reply that just cut him off politely and then, was going on her business. And he got torqued off about that because he had made an overture toward her and it had not been well received. And so he decided on the spur of the moment that he was going to abduct this girl, this woman, and rape her. And he probably even decided at that point he was going to kill her. But there was no planning in it. It was spur of the moment. So he didn't have the weapon with him he needed. He didn't have any of the planning that he normally did. And that's what got him arrested, in short. That he was seen by other people, and the authorities were had apprehended him in time, and she survived, thankfully.
Do you know the details of these? Because I've got some minor details of the 4. I saw that
Mhm.
Cammy was 18 years old, and so he
Mhm.
finds her, and he knows that her door is wide open. Does he use a gun or a knife, or does he just overpower them?
He
What's his
had,
MO?
he was said to be muscular, and these were teenage girls, that was one thing, but he had a knife that he would use. He called it he referred to it as like a 3-inch blade knife, and he used that in at least a couple of these abductions of the girls, to threaten and subdue them. And he also had a gun, but it was not a legal gun that he owned. It was stolen. He had stolen it a few weeks earlier. And so but I think he mainly, from the sounds of it, used the knife. And so in the case of Cami, she was at home alone that night. And this is 1991, September 1991, as I said. And so she was home alone. It was just an evening, and she was in her bedroom playing solitaire with a deck of cards. I actually remember doing that myself,
Oh,
many
wow.
years ago before we all had phones that we were attached to.
Right.
And so she was just hanging out in her bedroom, just playing solitaire, maybe bored. And that's when he dropped in and realized that the door was unlocked, and came in and was able to abduct her. He put her in his car. He drove her elsewhere. He drove her to this area of Milford that was a little remote, by this road called Buno. I've heard it pronounced Buno. It's spelled like Buno, though. Um, Buno and Charms Road in Milford Township. And that's where he raped her, he strangled her, and he buried her in a shallow grave. And then she came up missing, of course. Her sister came home around midnight that night and realized she wasn't there and wondered, okay, what's wrong? And then the next morning, her sister reported her as missing with the police, and the police looked, tried to find her. There was no indication of what happened to her. There was no clue in her bedroom that, of anything that had happened to her. And so she was a missing person case until he was arrested in May 1992.
So his next victim is Michelle and Melissa, and Michelle is 16 and Melissa is 14. and I see
Mhm.
that they're sisters that were
Mm.
walking together when they were abducted. That there's not a lot of cases that I've seen where 2 have actually been abducted at the same time.
It does seem a little strange. Yeah, the sisters evidently were really close, and they went for a near where they lived, and that was the one that's not far from me here in a town called Heartland or Tyrone Township, they call it. And, he was aware of them, he had stalked them. I saw one report that said that he was interested in the way the older sister walked or moved. I mean, it just is really chilling and very creepy, some of the details around this case. But he was driving around and he would case out the neighborhoods of these girls too. And evidently he had a therapist that he was seeing as part of his parole that was in that area. And so he would often be going to his therapist and he would check out the area while he was doing that. And so girls out walking and he pulled his car up to a point where they wouldn't see him and he could like secretly park there and he could hide in an area of brush or bushes as they were walking up to that area. And then he jumped out and again he had a knife and was able to abduct them and take them elsewhere. He drove them up the road to a town called Fenton, a few miles north of there. And that's where again, he took them to a remote area. This happened to be the edge of a cemetery in Fenton, and I had heard that he killed them pretty quickly after he abducted them, but I also saw a report where he wanted to talk with them for a while. Wonder, okay, why was he targeting young females, these teenage girls? And evidently, he said in one interview that he found them easy to relate to, that he felt like all of his years of incarceration, he had missed out on a lot, and so he just felt it was easier to talk to these young girls. Again, very creepy, but so I had heard that he put a blanket on the ground and they all sat down and he wanted to talk to them. The one very chilling aspect of this case, my least favorite detail about this case is that I have heard that each one of the 4 girls, he told them he was going to let them go if they would just do what he said. And he never intended to do that. And that to me is like really a torturous detail of this. But with the sisters, Michelle and Melissa, he ended up raping them, and then they died of suffocation. And I've seen different reports of that, whether or not they were strangled or I've heard a report where he sat on top of them and pressed their faces into the dirt and suffocated them that way. I also saw one report where authorities were speculating that he buried them, but he
Oh
did
god.
eventually bury them.
Right,
But
but buried them alive?
that's what they were
That's gotta be
speculating.
one of the worst ways to die.
So they did die of suffocation, asphyxiation that way. So
Do
yeah,
you know
again in
if
a shallow
the
grave.
sorry to interrupt you, but did he tie the other one up while he was
Mhm.
raping the other one? Because just
Yes.
logistically, that seems to be very hard.
Yep, yep, thank you for that detail, yes, that is true that he used the plastic ties, and they were evidently metal reinforced plastic ties or flex ties or zip ties,
Yeah,
whatever you
zip
wanna call
ties,
them,
what we call
but
yeah.
after his arrest. Yeah, and even police use them, right?
Right.
Police have used them sometimes. So, yeah, he definitely that was his, binding method of choice, and he did use that on these girls, and those ties were found in his possession when he was arrested, and that helped him, be connected to all of these crimes.
It just seems very brazen that he would choose, 2 teenage girls too.
Mhm.
In Delphi, I think that's the most recent case I can think of where 2 girls were kidnapped and raped and murdered, but they were young enough where I think a person could use intimidation alone. I know in that case he had a
Mm.
gun, but
Mhm.
still, you could see of how a grown man could easily intimidate his way through that. But this was a 14 and 16-year-old, and he had to
Mhm.
have known the difference and just the odds that they don't run away. I mean, 14 and 6-year-old females, they may be able to beat him in a foot chase. He doesn't look. I'll put in our picture up of him. I think this is more of one of his younger pictures, but
Mhm.
I mean, he doesn't look like he's that young, and I don't know. That just seems very odd that
Yeah,
he would do something like that.
he was in his 30s. He said something kind of interesting. I think it was 38 when he was arrested, but he said something kind of interesting about the incident with the survivor at the cemetery that he did not plan out, that got him arrested. He was talking about, and I'm remembering this is from a book. There is a book on the case. It's called Born Bent. It's by an author named Mick Strausser. So I encourage people to look that up. I haven't read the whole thing myself. I've just seen a couple little bits of it. But it's in this book that the author talks about what Williams said about the attack on this woman at the cemetery, and how he said something to the effect that because she fought him off physically. She was really fighting him. She was kicking him and just doing whatever she could. He said that changed his MO. That changed what he was doing, because he said normally to subdue a female, he was just using verbal threats. He was verbally subduing them. So maybe that kind of answers your question, in that what he said was key. But this
Right,
gal, her name was Carla, at the cemetery, she was kicking and screaming, hurting him, honestly, and he said because of that, because she fought him physically, determined he was gonna put her down, and he got physical, and he got to, much more. But up until that point, it was a verbal intimidation, not a physical one, and then it switched gears with her reaction. So I found that an interesting thing. And he has another interesting thing about him too. He actually did an interview on the Oprah Winfrey Show via satellite from prison after he was incarcerated. And he almost did it in a way to be like, okay, I'm a bad guy. Don't get caught by a bad guy like me. Like almost like he wanted to help people not get into this situation, almost like he was being instructional. And so I got that vibe when I
yeah.
read his firsthand account of the attack at the cemetery. Like he was saying, okay, this is what I did and this is why I did it, so keep that in mind if you're ever attacked. Which, nobody even wants to think about that. But he switched gears because of the victim's reaction. Now, that does not say that anybody should not fight back, because I still am a believer, and maybe you as a police officer too, that people should fight back if they're
Oh,
being,
absolutely. Yeah.
if they're being
You get in
attacked.
the
And
car, you're dead. Right.
oh my gosh, yes. And so I just found it very interesting how he explained a little bit of insight into his technique with these females.
It's really interesting when you look at uh, multiple serial killers, which I know that you have done, but that same tactic of using the excuse of being in an area that you necessarily don't live, and more or less hunting in that area while you're going to that appointment. That reminds me of a serial killer that was doing that with children named Lewis Lent, where he volunteered to take a blind couple to medical appointments. And while he was out of town at these medical appointments, he would drive around with their car and abduct and kill children.
Mm,
Yeah. And
mm,
uh, so on the outside, everyone thought that he was this great guy. And in reality, he was just using that as an excuse. And that really it really just shows people the planning that these serial killers are going through, where,
mhm,
this isn't a happenstance. I see a girl and I just snatch her. This
mhm,
is, I've seen them multiple times walking this certain path, and I'm going to, choose the point where I'm going to ambush them and formulate a plan to include bringing zip ties with me
mhm.
and
And a
having that
shovel.
destination. Yeah, I mean, he
Mhm.
brought a blanket with him. That shows
Yep.
just a lot of preparation
Yep.
in his thinking, and how much thought these people put into it.
Mhm. Yep. He did a lot
So
of
with the
planning.
last victim, Cynthia, she was 15 years old when she was
Mhm.
abducted in 1992, I believe. Do you know anything about that case?
Yeah, that in 1992, like January 4th or so, Cindy, as I guess she went by, she and her boyfriend Luke were going out for the night, and they told her mom before they left her house, "We're just gonna go out for a little while." There is an episode of a TV show that talks about the Williams case where they interview Cindy's mom, which is very interesting too. I encourage people to look because I watched it a couple times. I watched it a few months ago, and then I just watched it again recently. But her mom has some very compelling things to say about the case and the last night that she saw Cindy alive and all of that interviewed. And the series is called The Lake Erie Murders, and it's an episode from February 2020, I believe. But anyways, it's really good. But so Cindy and Luke were going out, and she lived in Milford, and they went to this park in the town of Milford, like in town, in downtown, and they were in their car. They were just sitting in a car, and this man runs up with a ski mask on and, and tells them some story about how he just robbed a place and he needs their car. Get out of your car. I got to have your car. I need your car. And so he shuffles them around, was able to subdue them again, threaten him, and he has a ski mask on. Um, but he is able to, again, he had to have some kind of weapon, although I'm not sure what it was in that case. Maybe it was a knife again, but he was able to take the boyfriend Luke and tie him to a tree,
Yep.
and then Cindy, he took elsewhere. He put in his car and drove to another location, and then ended up raping her. He stabbed her in the chest. So he changed his MOs, which is another interesting aspect of this case. He had three different methods of killing over these three different murderous incidents. And so he stabbed Cindy in the chest and then again buried her in a shallow grave. And that was also in Milford Township. It was just a little ways west, like a couple miles west of where he had buried Cami Villanueva. This was also along Buno Road, but it was like Old Plank Road. Again, a little bit of a remote area. And so buried her in a shallow grave, just like with the others. And she was another missing person case. And, authorities investigated and tried to figure out, and again I think her mom touches on this a little bit in her interview on this TV show, that you hold out hope that she's just somewhere. She just maybe ran away or whatever, and she's safe, but maybe she'll come back, but not the case.
It's funny now that you bring up that show, but I actually remember watching it, and now
Mhm.
I can vividly remember that scene that you were just describing. It's a great show.
Mhm.
Uh,
Yes, yes.
I remember, Nick Edwards, who is a Wild Blue author, was on that
Yes.
show giving some commentary as well.
Oh,
So,
okay. On which
yeah.
episode?
Yeah, I think that was season 2 that you're talking about, and he's on
Okay.
season 1, if I'm
Okay,
not
I'll have to look
mistaken.
that up. Cool.
Yes, yeah. But yeah, he's on everything though, so it doesn't surprise me. But yeah,
Mhm.
I do think that that is very interesting. So he just flat out confesses to these to the police, correct?
He finally does. He doesn't at first. They've got him for the attempted abduction, kidnapping, rape, whatever, of Carla, the attempted murder of Carla, because he had Carla in his trunk and he had put a tie around her neck and tightened it. And evidently, Carla had asthma. And so she was having a hard time breathing to begin with. And then she was put in this enclosed space in this trunk. And then she had a zip tie around her neck. So it was really a miracle that a police officer got her out of the trunk in time. So they have him on that, which is pretty substantial. And he doesn't want to cop to any of the earlier crimes. But meantime, they find in his possession a shovel and the zip ties. And as they're digging in and investigating him further, I guess they found in his wallet some photos of female body parts without the head, the head not in the photo. And they thought, okay, this is a little weird. And they found more photos at his home too. And then they also found in his possession, he had a ring that belonged to Cami Villanueva. And so then the lights are starting to come on that these missing person cases, four missing girls in this same area of Metro Detroit, they're actually putting the pieces together and realizing that this guy could be their perp. And so it took him a while, though. I guess he met with family members while he was in jail after his arrest, and he was starting to confess the crimes to his family members, and then eventually did confess them to police. But in that episode of the Lake Erie murders, it does, they interview a former girlfriend. I think she's one of the people that they interview, as I recall. But she has an interesting story because after Williams is arrested, she hears it on the news or whatever, and she realizes, oh, okay, that was that guy I was dating. That was my boyfriend. She comes forward to police and she tells them how when they were dating, she gave him a kitten. And he told her later he had killed the kitten. And the police were interested in, okay, where did what kitten? Because he had told her he killed the kitten and buried the kitten. And the police are like, where did he bury that kitten? And wouldn't you know it, it was at the site where he buried Cammy over
Oh,
at
wow.
Charms Road
Yeah.
and Buno Road in Milford Township. Because police went there, they started searching, they started digging, and then they realized, okay, they realized that they had a grave site. And so then his goose was cooked. I mean, what could he do after that? And so he led them to where the other three girls, the two sites where the other three girls were buried, he led the police there like a day or so later.
That's really interesting of how people's rationale is to, and we see this time and time again where they have like their burial sacred site, even though they put all this planning behind it. And just logistically, if you're trying to get away with multiple murders, you wouldn't put all the bodies, I would think, in one place unless you're extremely sure that no one's going to find them,
Mhm.
in that place.
Mhm.
But you even go so far as to take a kitten that you could just bury in your backyard, to this place. So
Yeah. It makes me
it
wonder
probably
what.
ties into that whole graveyard fascination,
Yes.
whatever,
Yes.
is going through his head about the fascination of death and how sacred that is to him.
Mhm. Yeah, and after his arrest, he admitted he had a lot of issues and around death evidently, and he had a compulsion to kill. He said as much, and he was very honest with police. He said, "You better just lock me up and throw away the key." I mean, wow. And I think he said as much on the Oprah show too, like it's a good thing I'm here because if I was set free, I would do it again.
Yeah, that's probably one of the few honest things that he said.
Mhm.
Well, that trial or that case really affected Michigan law, right? I mean, that kind of pointed out this whole we're releasing people way too early and paroling them when they're
Mhm.
violent offenders. And this is kind of what happens when we don't keep people locked up for a substantial amount of time.
It really brought a lot of things to light. They interviewed parole officers of his for the news reports at the time, and they said they called him a model parolee at the time. And they said, well, he was working, he was providing proof of that, he was showing his pay stubs, he was reporting to the parole officers on time, he was checking off all the boxes, he was following the rules, and there was never any inkling that something was up with him. But it did bring to light in general the issues with Michigan's parole system at the time. I mean, especially the 1983 to 1990 incarceration, where he was out so early and the crimes really got a lot more serious. And so there was reform that was drawn up. There was legislation that was drawn up later that year in 1992 after his arrest to address some of these failings of the system.
I think that's the flawed thinking in this is they're treating him like a drug addict, where
Mm.
it's like, "Oh, he can hold a steady job. He can show up to appointments. He doesn't, fail a drug test." And that sort of
Mhm.
thing, and it's like, I've got a picture here of a guy who also held a steady job, if I can get to pop up. We've got
Oh.
Mr. Kohlberger here, who
I
just
think I saw him
confessed
on
to
the news
4
just
murders.
tonight. Yup, and he was very forthcoming as well. Oh my
Right,
gosh, I just
um,
saw that news report.
but yeah, I
Mm.
mean, that's a perfect example of a guy that, he can everyone called him weird from the interviews that I've seen. He had, like, that socially awkward piece, but
Mm.
as far as able to check boxes, he was smart enough to be able to do that,
Mhm.
and even put a lot of thought and planning, even though he got caught, behind something as complicated as, murdering 4 people.
Mhm. Yep.
Uh,
Wow.
so so, as far as the media and the attention that got, did this get a lot of media attention, and was there outlash over the parole system, or was this or were they just focused on, "This is another serial killer from Michigan, no offense." But this seems to be kind of, I mean, you're getting some good books out of it. Y
Oh gosh. Um, I don't remember hearing about this case at the time. I was living in Lansing. I had graduated from Michigan State. I was in my first job or two at that point, and I do not remember hearing about this case at the time. I remember hearing about another case that is still a disappearance that has never been solved. That gal's name was Paige Renkowski, and she was abducted from I-96 in Michigan in the greater Detroit area, I guess you would say, and not far from where this case where all these sites happen, like Novi, Northville area along that 96 corridor on the way to Lansing, I believe, as I recall. Um, so it's kind of crazy, but I know it was sometime in the early 90s. I'm pretty sure that Paige Renkowski was abducted, but but I remember hearing that was huge. I heard about that. I mean, up, down, and sideways, and I didn't even really live close to where she was abducted, but it was all over the news, and people still talk about it. If you Google Paige Renkowski, it will come up. She is still discussed, and that's a good case to explore too. But this with Williams, I don't remember hearing, and I know that I have found news reports on this online now, news reports from the time, so I know that it was covered pretty decently. Um, but each of these individual disappearances of these girls, it's really a shame when it's a case of, okay, maybe she ran away and maybe this is not a thing, maybe this is not a crime, maybe it just doesn't get the coverage.
Yeah, I think it's especially hard when they're not in one location like that. How he's kind of jumping all around, so it's not,
Mhm.
"Hey, we're
And see,
getting
people
multiple
had
people from the school."
Ye right. Police had no inkling of a serial because his MOs were different. They bring this up in the Lake Erie murders episode. His MO was different for each of the 3 incidents and the 4 girls, and they were in different towns, they were in different areas. So again, I think as we alluded to earlier, different municipalities investigating the missing girls, and so it's not really even a blip on a radar, the idea that maybe one person could have abducted these girls. It was not an inkling till they arrested him and found these items in his possession that helped bring the light bulbs on.
That always shocks me too. I get it why well, I don't understand it, but the whole keeping trophies things, there's another, Michigan, I believe he's probably a serial killer. His name is, Drew Planton, and he actually came from Michigan to Raleigh, North Carolina, and murdered
Mm,
a girl named Stephanie Bennett, And
Okay.
then when they uh, made the arrest, he had a pistol on him that got linked to a murder in Michigan.
Hmm.
And more recently, his brother has been posting on Reddit about how he believes that Drew was a serial killer. He ended up
Wow.
killing himself in jail before trial.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
but he told
Huh.
kind of an eerie story about how his one day his mom was checking the trunk of Drew's car, and the trunk had blood-stained carpet in it,
Oh boy.
and
Uh,
she called the police, but allegedly the police didn't respond. Well, in the case with Stephanie Bennett, took as a trophy a laundry basket and also a radio, which just seems completely
hmm.
random. I can
Yep.
feel like a ring or something small, but something that big and
Mhm.
bulky that just don't make
I
any
mean,
sense. I'm
yeah.
sure to him at the time it made sense.
Mhm. Maybe he just needed a radio.
Yeah.
I mean, what? But do you
Uh,
know where in Michigan he was from? I don't think I've heard of
you know
this
what?
one.
I'll have to pull that up. That's just a thought that kind of popped in my head, and
Okay.
when that happened, I
Huh.
lived close to that area, so that was kind of one of the impactful things in my life, seeing, like, police work a big crime like that,
Ah, so it
and
was a
it didn't
while
get solved
ago?
right away.
When yeah, do you know what year it was?
It was I believe it was early 2000s.
Early
Um,
2000s. So it's possible he could have murdered others, and maybe those, cases might have been in Michigan. Hmm.
yeah, well, another, fun fact about him that, was not reported is that when um it was 2002
Okay.
is when it happened, and he got arrested October 2005.
Hmm.
But a fun fact about him that wasn't reported, I need to do a show on this, and have someone on that worked the case, but when they were doing the search warrant on his house, they actually found a Tupperware, like a large Tupperware container, and inside the Tupperware container were small Tupperware containers, and each container was a pair of women's panties neatly folded up.
Mm. Mhm.
And this
Huh.
was like a big container full.
Okay.
So, are those
Hmm.
trophies, or are these just like, something that he's stolen or something that he's bought? Very weird guy.
Yeah. Huh. Yeah, that is a weird one. I suspect that they were stolen from women. That is my
Yeah.
guess. Put in a sealed container. Very, very odd.
Yeah, it was that, and he had 2 copies of every Playboy
Oh,
still in
wow.
the plastic, which, you know, these guys are weird for a reason, right? And, but again, I just think that it always fascinates me of what people actually take from these crimes and,
Mm.
keep on their possession. Just seems
Mhm.
like a really bad idea. Not that I want people to have good ideas doing this.
Yeah. Well, in the case of Williams, I know I had read also that they found at his home a couple like plastic flowers that he had stolen from the cemetery where he buried Melissa and Michelle. A couple red, distinct red plastic flowers, evidently. So that's an odd little token to take as well.
So do they think that he's just on the 4? Shouldn't I shouldn't say just 4 because
I
murdering
know.
4
Oh
people
gosh.
is enough.
Is no inkling that I could find that he may have done others. He has not made any allusions to that. And it seems like after his appearance on Oprah, he's been pretty quiet in prison since then. I listened to a podcast where the female host said that she reached out to him in prison, and this is in very recent years, had reached out to him in prison and asked for an interview, and he turned her down and said, "I really don't want to raise a fuss. I don't want to be any trouble. I don't want to talk about it, you know." And I guess he was essentially saying, "I don't want to renew any interest in any of this because I don't want to be a part of any more turmoil over it." So that was interesting.
That is. Well, do you have anything else about this case that you can provide us with?
Hmm. Well, I definitely am not an expert on it. I've just taken a crash course recently, and I would say, get the book Born Bent and really dig into the details, or watch the TV show that's on it. There is going to be an episode of World's Most Evil Killers where they talk to at least one cop who worked the case as well, and that episode will be coming out probably in the next year or so. They talked to they I know they interviewed like a profiler that had worked on this case too, or on a profile of Williams. So that should be interesting. So look for that. But yeah, I mean, these serial killer cases I think are always intriguing as to the $1 million question of why. In the case of Williams, he did have a very troubled childhood, and he shares that aspect with Benjamin Atkins as well. And that stood out to me because he had a very abusive childhood. He had a mom who was a prostitute, just like Atkins, but she was working prostitution out of their home in the suburb of Garden City, the Detroit suburb on the west side of Garden City, which is, a quiet little suburb. And this was back in the 1950s. She was doing sex
Oh,
work out
wow.
of her home when Leslie was a very small boy, and his dad was abusive and evidently beat Leslie and abused Leslie's mom's daughters by her previous marriage. He had a couple half sisters who were older than him, and his dad sexually abused them and was arrested for that and incarcerated for that at some point in Leslie's childhood. And his mom was arrested too. And then his mom married again a third time, and that was to an abusive person that who also evidently beat Leslie. And so Leslie had a rough childhood, and he was shuffled around. He was in California for a while. He was in Michigan, in different parts of the metro area of Detroit. So I think he had a pretty rough childhood. But I don't know. I mean, what leads someone to embark on that kind of life of crime and repeat offenses? He was even a peeper, like a window peeper, a voyeur, and his dad had done that as well. His dad was actually a voyeur to Leslie's mom's sex work, was watching her with people that she had doing the sex work in the house. And so that's another interesting aspect. That was a behavior that he learned direct his dad. But as far as all the other crimes, I mean, the $1 million question of why he crosses that line to take human life is always the most fascinating aspect to me. And there's no clear answer. As with the other serial killer cases that I've researched, there's just really no clear answer. But it is very, very interesting to try to figure it out, to look at all the different details and think, okay, maybe this had something to do with it, and maybe it was that. But I guess it's up to each person's own interpretation.
Yeah, absolutely. And you see all those commonalities, especially with the voyeurism. I know that's one of the things that the FBI profilers will look at in the past, and that seems to be an indicator in of itself if someone's going to be a serial killer or not. I know that when we were looking at or doing research for our book, that's one of the items that was listed in there.
Mm.
But yeah, it's a fascinating case, and I appreciate you coming on. Is there anything next that you're working on currently?
Boy, I love the research. I would love to dig back into a new case. I'm just waiting to see how things go with this. And I've always got other projects. I write a bunch of different kinds of projects. And so I've always got other stuff going on. But as far as the true crime, I'm going to see how this goes for a little while before I embark on anything new.
All right. Well, again, we've got both your books. If I can get this to work, the Baby Doll Serial Killer, the John Eric Armstrong Homicide, and also we've got The Crack City Strangler, The Homicides of Serial Killer Benjamin Atkins. Both of these are available at Amazon, Barnes and Noble. There's Kindle versions. I believe there's an
Mhm.
Audible version as well.
Yep. Yep, there's audio, paperback, hardcover, and Kindle. Yes, 4 formats.
And if people want to follow you on social media, is it BR Bates at can you give us that plug for me?
Yeah, I am on Instagram, under brbates.author. I'm on Pinterest under author BR Bates. I'm on YouTube under, BR Bates author, I believe. So, yeah, look for me, or if you do a search on YouTube, just search BR Bates and it should come up. I am doing a series of videos that highlight each of the victims in both of the cases that I've written books about, both Atkins and Armstrong's. I'm highlighting each one of the women who were assaulted by them. So I'm doing a series on that, and I call it hashtag Remember Them because that's the most important aspect.
That is. I'm glad you're doing that. And if you'd like to support me or the show, you can always follow me on Apple and Spotify and give us a review. This show is also going to be on YouTube, so please like and subscribe. And if you would like to get my book, it's A Murder on Campus, The Professor, the Cop, and North Carolina's Most Notorious Cold Case. I wrote that with my brother, Brian Santana, who is a professor of true crime. And that is also available at Barnes and Noble, Amazon, anywhere where you can buy a book. You can also get it on Kindle and Audible. BR, thank you very much and hope to see you again.
Thank you.